Hello everyone! I haven't talked about perfect kits since the very beginning of Splatoon 3, but now it's time to revisit it once again. I asked a bunch of high-level players of their specific weapons what they think would be the perfect sub and special combination, and this is what they said. I'm gonna go through all of their kits and give my personal opinions on them, and at the very end we'll take a look at some statistics for what was most common, what was left out, and what weapons already had their perfect kits. Be sure to subscribe if you enjoy, and let's get started with the ramble. So first up is the Sploosh-o-matic. Jeff picked out Splat Bomb and Trizooka for the kit, which should be pretty familiar with anyone who's played Splatoon 1, as it was the Sploosh 7 kit in that game. This is one that I pretty handily agree with. I think that Sploosh is very held back by having Ultra Stamp, obviously. That special has a lot of problems right now and doesn't really cover for Sploosh as well, and so I think giving it a long-range special that's not only really strong, but covers for one of the biggest weaknesses of the weapon is a really good start. I think the Sploosh could get a good amount of them, and its high mobility would give it a reason to be picked over something like a traditional Splatter Shot, and Splat Bomb is also a good choice. You lose a little bit of mobility compared to the Curling Bomb, but honestly, Sploosh has plenty, and having a little bit more consistent poking options to make up for that range disadvantage is very helpful. And I think that's what's important to go over. I think that Sploosh, especially in Splatoon 3, really needs ways to make up for its range disadvantage with how many mid-range weapons are in the meta, and it currently does not have a toolkit able to do so. Next up is our first weapon kit that's already in the game, with Gray's Splattershot Jr. keeping the classic Splat Bomb and Big Bubbler kit. Now, I think Splat Bomb is just one of the best subs to be able to have double of more of consistently, which is Junior's thing if you're running that. And just in general, with a lot of slower weapons, I think that frequent Splat Bombs are limiting the ability of those weapons to jump and have to be a little more careful of. That's something I take a lot of notice of since I play weapons like Range or S-Blast or Dreadringer that have those kind of speed problems, and it's always an issue with Junior. Now, Big Bubbler might be a point to be contested a little bit. It's kind of hard to say if it could be the best special for it, because I think some other more spammier options could be considered to make up for the weapon's high output. However, I think Junior's paint and extra bombs do give a good reason to have a special that can keep your main weapon and serve as a quick ink tank refill, and with Junior seeing more use recently than it has before, it might end up that this is the best thing it could get. Next up for the Aerospray is Shadow, who's going with a weapon kit that is probably the most common combination we'll see for some reason. Burst Bomb and Trizooka. Shadow's basically said that there's not much you can do to save Aerospray, but I guess I get the idea here. You get a lot of Zookas, and Burst Bomb helps with the fighting a little bit. It's pretty standard, and admittedly, yeah, there's not really too much you can do to save the main weapon of Aerospray in this environment, but I'm unsure if Zooka is the absolute best for it. But I guess being a more spammy Splatter Shot with a Burst Bomb is something different for sure, if it is trying to have its own niche. After that is the Splatter Shot from Kiver, and I should note right here that I am very late on this video, so these were options that I asked for all the way back in 9.1. I don't think anything's changed too drastically to indicate some of the kits would be different, but these are a few months old by the time this video comes out, so most notably it is post Fizzy nerf. However, I really don't think the kit would change regardless. This is Fizzy Bomb and Penna Missiles, and I think it's pretty obvious what this is going for. It's just trying to be a better K-Shot. While I do think there's an argument that Killer Whale might be a little bit better for shot compared to missiles, since you can spam it a little bit more and the special's a bit stronger, I think the extra paint output of missiles combined with Fizzy might have been a more valuable combination, and Fizzy on a weapon like Splattershot isn't really something we've seen. It hasn't been on a standard short-range shooter besides Aerospray, not really the most relevant competitive weapon, so it's hard to say exactly how this would go, but I think the added combat utility that it was given in the buff, if anything, might give it a stronger combination, and it would be really easy for Shot to run double Fizzy, so if this is trying to be a buffed up K-Shot for this game, I think it succeeded. Next up is Kiver's .52 Gal, and you can probably guess what this was going to be right off the get-go, even before the Booyah Bomb buffs this was picked. but the Booyah buffs definitely cemented this as the best option. Obviously, the double survivability is exceptionally good. It would not be as broken as it was in Splatoon 2 without armor to chain to it and more options to shred Booyah. But I mean, with how good 52 is with Whale, it's hard to argue that a special that would act as even better continuation for it and provide some extra utility against HP specials wouldn't be just a direct upgrade for it in every way. For the end zap, this one was picked out by Mecha, and we have yet another short-range shooter with a Fizzy Bomb. It's going to be pretty hard to argue here, and this is the start of a bit of a trend I will point out here, which is there aren't a lot of suction bombs in this list, and most of the options that would normally have suction bomb for this extra paint output was taken by Fizzy. This is one where you could argue it might change a little bit now that Fizzy paints a whole 5 points less every single time. However, the extra utility of Fizzy is worth it in my opinion, and I think the extra combat utility is not lost in terms of usefulness. So once again here, I think it would be really great, and this is paired with Crab Tank this time. There are definitely some cooler options here, but it might be a bit less weapons than people are thinking. And this is one theme that I think we'll see a little bit throughout this video, which is the perfect kits are going to vary a lot on the weapon. It's not just this sub is broken, we're putting it on everything. In this case, cooler really needs to be with weapons that output it a lot, and the short-range shooter slot has been filled with other options that have a bit more combat utility, especially with their specials. So we've been seeing more things like Splash or Splatter Shot, and not a whole lot of stuff like End Zap. So in this case, I think it makes sense to give it something like Crab Tank that can make up for that damage output. It'd be a very unique combat kit, a little bit different from the Splash-O-Matic since you have a Fizzy instead of a Burst Bomb, but I think it would make a lot of sense. And compared to Splash, Fizzy works better here since the indirect hit of Fizzy Bomb hitting twice does combo with End Zap where it wouldn't with the weaker damage from Splash. Speaking of Splash, to absolutely no one's surprise, Splash-O-Matic will be retaining the kit it has now, meaning we already have a third kit that is currently in the game. Looking good so far for Splatoon 3's track record, and it's kind of hard to say anything about this kit that hasn't been talked about already. This is one of the most discussed and best kits in the game, and I really like it for Splash, so it's cool to see. Up next is Nolan with our first mid-range shooter, the Splattershot Pro. Nolan chose to keep the Burst Bomb on this weapon. I do think its damage combos would be a little bit more consistent with other options potentially, but it did get a damage buff, and having that utility to support teammates could be very interesting. I do think Splattershot Pro tends to compete more for the painting role in the team rather than a midline fighting weapon, but if you are looking for more fighting, then the Trizooka definitely plays a role there. It's something it had in Splatoon 1 and worked quite well for it before, so I could definitely see it being good in this game. It's a little bit hard to tell what exactly would be perfect with Splattershot Pro, considering just how little the weapon is used despite having a really good kit already. But I think having another interesting mid-range Burst Bomb support, giving high damage of any hit from the main weapon or sub, together with Trizooka, would definitely be a lot of factors in the weapon's favor. Bray is up next with the Splattershot Nova, and I do remember my conversation with him a little bit about this, and how he would talk about that Inkjet was really good for it back when Inkjet was really broken. But as of right now, with Jet in its current spot, it's not too surprised to see it replaced by Tri-Strike. Now, unfortunately, Tri-Strike doesn't get rid of your main weapon for as long as something like Jetpack has, which is a big boost for the Splattershot Nova, which doesn't really have that great a main weapon, but Tri-Strike spam is pretty noteworthy, and compared to something like Neo Splash, having Burst Bomb to work with the main weapon and help make up for its weakness might compensate for that pretty well and give it reason to be used. Up next for the 96 gal, to no one's surprise, Wall is going to stay for it, but Kraken is getting replaced here. While it's an iconic special for it, it definitely is on the weaker end right now, and so it's no surprise to see Crab replace it. This is very similar to 52 in terms of having an HP special to help maintain survivability, but it's done with something a little bit more mid-range here, which fits 96 quite well. I think Crab would be absolutely disgusting on this weapon. Being able to wall your own Crab to be even more tanky against stuff like Chargers is a ridiculously good combo, and it fits very well with where this weapon would like to position. No doubts in my mind this would be the best kit you could put on it. Finally, on our list of normal shooters is the Jet Squelcher, with Burst Bomb and Antenna Missiles from Ice here, basically just merging its Splatoon 2 kits, and Not really a big surprise here. Like with Shot, I think the missile location and paint output would make it a little bit more reliable than Whale, despite having a little bit less output, and Burst Bomb is definitely there to help make Jet a little bit more flexible. I don't think this kid would be too annoying to play against, but regardless, that's not what's being talked about here in terms of being most optimal. I think that this is definitely a good candidate for it. Missiles is also a great option for Jet Squelcher, considering you're often going to be fighting an anchor with more range than yourself, and so having a special to reliably get them out of the way is something a comp with Jet Squelcher would definitely need. So I think this would definitely be one of the stronger kits it could get. Next up is Kiver with the L3 Nozzle Nose, and I was a little surprised not to see Burst Bomb on it, considering how well it worked before. However, Torp on it is a really good option for sure. The extra location utility paired with the high paint output of L3 would make it particularly good against sharking weapons. The main weapon is still able to do quite a considerable bit of damage, and Rolled Torp can still work for a mini Burst Bomb. And Trizooka with it makes a lot of sense. Jetpack worked with it very well in Splatoon 2, and this is the special with the most similar role that's in a better balance spot than Inkjet is currently. So I think it does make a lot of sense. I think Torp's location utility is going to actually do a lot of heavy lifting when comparing with similar options like Splattershot, so maybe that was a really good choice just for that alone. I think this would be a very fun kit, and it's always cool to talk about something like L3 that doesn't see a lot of competitive use, mostly due to the weapon kits and not the main weapon itself. But it's a little hard to say how good it would be exactly, since, you know, we don't really see it anyway. Next up is the H3 for Obito, and this is the first kit I'm a little bit more unsure about. Obito obviously has way more experience with H3 than me, and he came up with Burst Bomb and Trizooka. This seems to be a very combat-focused kit, moving H3 away from the supportive role, which might make sense. Its ink efficiency is a lot worse than it used to be, especially given this was a kit made in 9.1 before that slight buff, and currently the H3D has been the more prominent competitive one, which is not tied to having to get cooler for the team. However, I'm still a little bit skeptical personally. I think having a kit that can be a little bit more supportive, at least with something like Suction Bomb, would have been a bit better, and while the damage combos are there, I think H3 is a bit more of a hit or miss type of weapon, and I'm not sure if Burst Bomb would really help the consistency without making the ink efficiency problem a bit more of a weakness here. But it is definitely an interesting option to say for sure, and again, I don't play the weapon actively right now, this is just my take on it. Next up for Squeezer, of course, the person picking the weapon kit is Atomic. They wanted Splash Wall and Splatter Color Screen. The first time we're seeing Screen on this list, and I do kind of see the synergy there. It does help a bit with sharking opponent. It does help a bit with just controlling fights. Squeezer is very good at working off of the damage it outputs, and this is one of those weapons where you really just want to keep the main as much as possible, so it makes sense to have a special that doesn't take it away. Is the synergy good enough with it and Wall to be able to warrant losing something like Zuka? I'm a little bit less sure, it's kind of hard to say, but I do think there could be some interesting synergy between Wall and Screen, since you can wall yourself, the enemy team might have a hard time telling where the wall is, or even if they could, it means that they can't really use the fact that you're blinded by your own screen sometimes to your disadvantage, because you'll have a shield protecting you even if they are shooting from it. So it might be really easy for Squeezer to use that combination of tools to find a better way in and be able to just take all the fights the main weapon is good at, so this might just be the perfect option at enabling that main weapon. Next up is Omega with Carbon Roller, and unsurprisingly this is going to be the same perfect kit that it has right now. It's kind of hard to argue with it. Like with Sploosh, Zuka works perfectly for a weapon with this much range disadvantage, and Burst Bomb is Burst Bomb on a Carbon Roller. This has been a combination in 2 separate games already, so there's been plenty of time to make sure that, no, yeah, this is in fact going to be the best thing you can do on it, so it's pretty hard to argue against it. For Splat Roller is Atomic. Once again, keeping a kit it has right now with Curling Bomb and Big Bubbler. This has been especially clear more recently that it works for it. I think Fizzy is something you could argue for sure. However, I think for Roller, the the extra mobility is such an important point that while Fizzy could definitely work with it, I could also see curling being the better option just for how good it is with roller specifically. And I've talked about in the past plenty on how good roller is at controlling and utilizing its own bubble, so it's no surprise to see it here. Next up with Gray's Dynamo, we are 3 for 3 on perfect kits for the rollers. Just back to back, we're keeping this one. Some people might be a little confused by Sprinkler, but I think it makes a lot of sense for Dynamo. Being able to quickly paint under itself for a movement option is useful, but also with Dynamo's weaker paint output, it is pretty important to have a sub to help with that to ensure you get enough coolers. So I think if you wanted to ditch the Sprinkler and go with a combat style kit, I could see a different sub, but since we're keeping the cooler one as a support for the weapon, which makes sense, that's what it's been as a role for the past 3 games, I think that Sprinkler makes the most sense for the weapon synergy and ensuring the cooler output is good enough. I think the problems tend to lie with the main weapon on this one. Omega's up next with Flings a Roller, and we have a wholly original sub and special being put on this one, with Squid Beacon and Triple Ink Strike. Flings' spamming Ink Strikes isn't that hard to see, really, with how well the main weapon paints, and the fact that it spam missiles in S2, so having a special with no cooldown that helps with its paint would make a lot of sense here. Beacon is probably the new point, and while it could take away from its paint a little bit, I think deployables are generally a lot better on stuff like anchors. Things like Ink Mine, Sprinkler, or Beacon that you kind of just set up and forget about it is good. Beacon does require a little more maintenance than those other options. However, I think that Flings is setting them up could be very good for aggressive teams that want to play without an anchor, given how good Flings is at defending itself as a main weapon, so I think that'd be a cool option. However, personally, I think Ink Mine helps a lot with what I just talked about already, so I'm unsure if Beacon would end up being better than something like Mind Strike, personally. Finally is Pika with the Big Swig Roller, going with Burst Bomb Tri-Strike. Now, Burst Bomb should be no surprise. A weapon that has problems with damage consistency and not having a horizontal that one-shots would obviously massively benefit from a Burst Bomb, but Tri-Strike is a bit of a different one. Obviously, very strong paint weapon, could just spam the absolute crap out of strikes, but I think it might have a little bit of problems when Swig is playing more aggressively under ledges like a typical roller to not have a special it could use easily in that position. So this might promote more passive gameplay, which to me goes a little bit against giving it the Burst Bomb in the first place, though it could obviously just pick when it hangs back for strike. It's not the biggest problem in the world, so this would definitely still be a very strong kit, but I think there's potential for a special that might be able to synergize a bit better in those aggressive situations. Next up is the classic Squiffer, actually keeping the big bubbler, which I'm a little bit surprised by. It is a very strong special right now, but I think that Squiffer isn't super reliable at killing people with its bubble up as other options are that have more consistent hitboxes or kill times or fire rates, but it obviously could still work with the weapon. It does allow it to stand further forward ahead, which is something it needs, and auto bomb on it makes a lot of sense. Having a bomb that can locate people while having bomb utility as a weapon that benefits heavily from having people located to try and shoot them with their one shot, I think is a very natural combination. I think there could be some potential for a different special weapon that might be a little bit more consistent, but it's still hard to argue with how good Bubble is right now. For GoodTuber, they decided to go with Burst Bomb and Trizooka. We've seen Burzooka a few times by now, definitely one of the main combinations we've been seeing here, and I think it does make sense with GoodTuber. Remember, this weapon does actually use partial charges a bit, so being able to use that to combo with the main weapon is pretty important for it, so I think that might actually help you go for partials more often, and Zuka is a nice quick option to defend yourself that could also be useful against longer range options. Hypnosis Bamboozler kit just basically is Roller's kit, which might seem a little bit surprising, but remember the good synergy I talked about with curling and bubble before? That could definitely apply here. I think Bamboo has a bit of an easier time using its bubble than something like Squiffer, since the weapon can be a bit faster and a little bit more consistent with the slightly larger hitbox. And I do think this could work quite well. Maybe Fizzy would have been a little bit better to help with the bubble output while still maintaining some of the utility. I don't think it's as threatening as something on Roller, but I definitely see the idea behind this kit for pushing Bamboo to be very aggressive, and when it sets itself up could be very tough to deal with. Basil's Splat Charger kit, to no one's surprise, is going to be the ZF kit. It's been pretty much known since the weapon came out that this was one of the strongest kits it could get, literally being a buffed version of the Firefin kit it got in Splatoon 2, which it was also very liked in that game, so it's not too surprising to see it here. Very consistent at its positioning due to the wall helping with any inconsistency. Strikes help a lot with paint output and are quick to use to keep that powerful main weapon active. Makes a lot of sense. For E-Leader, the dreaded Burst Bomb that I think wouldn't be that bad to have with it back, honestly. I think it'd be fine. Comes back, of course. And we have Inkstorm for the special, returning from Splatoon 2. It's a little bit hard to tell what special E-Leader should get. Generally, something that keeps the main weapon active is agreed upon to be a good idea for it, since the long-range sniping power limiting enemies' movement is such a key part of the weapon. And I think that Inkstorm, like with Tri-Strike, can help a bit with the paint output, but I'm not sure if the special power is all there. Compared with something like Tri-Strike, it's just a little bit weaker, but it's kind of hard to say. Inkstorm is mostly uncommon due to the weapons it's on, not the special itself, and with the healing factor, there are some unique synergies you could pull off with it for sure, so I could definitely still see this being one of the stronger options for the weapon. And finally, with Chargers is the good old Snipe Rider over here, picked out by Bagel, and really the only change we're seeing is the Sprinkler replaced with an Ink Mine, which Ink Mine does do a minimum of 35 damage, which means if you're trying to rush Snipe Rider down and you get hit by a mine, one shot is going to kill you. I think you can imagine why that would be an upgrade from Sprinkler. That would make this weapon incredibly difficult to punish. Mines could also be used to help keep zone or another area, boosting Snipe Rider's paint output, and unlike something like Dynamo, I think its cooler output is totally fine without the Sprinkler. So it makes sense that it would boost the weapon's fighting capabilities and difficulty to take out instead. Next up, Sloshers. Starting with Kyo is the normal Slosher. Unsurprisingly, this is gonna have another Burst Bomb, with 10 missiles being picked as the new special weapon. While they aren't as strong as Tri-Strike, it definitely has a little bit better synergy with the main weapon, considering that the missile chip damage is easy for Bucket to combo off of and would probably synergize super well with Burst Bombs. The location utility to be able to see people through walls being especially useful for this weapon. The only real thing you could critique here, in my opinion, is that missiles couldn't be used in the middle of fighting, such as stuff like Bubble or Zipcaster that the swords have. However, you have a Burst Bomb on Bucket, so you're probably gonna be fine without any special in the first place. So it makes sense to stack into some team utility for this option. For Tri-Slosher, once again, Burst Bomb is making another return. I was a little bit surprised personally that this was picked over Fizzy Bomb, but I guess the quicker speed for the main weapon is a little bit useful. Big Bubbler, on the other hand, isn't that surprising. Tri would be very good at keeping people out of Bubble, and if it ever did rush in, it would have a way to set up and actually stay deployed. Bubble is a pretty good option for short-range weapons with big hitboxes to keep people out, and that would work very well for this weapon. Sloshing Machine will actually keep its current kit with Fizzy Bomb and Booyah Bomb. The only really bad part about this kit is it's 220 points for special in the current game. While Booyah Bomb isn't as good as other specials, the ability to support its team, work off of its damage more easily, paint with its Fizzy Bomb, and be able to use it as continuation in a team fight is a combination that has proven itself to be basically perfect throughout the beginning of Splatoon 3's life cycle. It's finally a kit that I actually made, which is Dreadringer. Torp is the very obvious choice for a sub-weapon here, since it gets to work with pretty much every part of Dreadringer. I actually talked about this in a Third Kits video prior, but Tacticooler is the different one. While Crab Tank might be a little bit more fun in theory, if I'm going for the absolute best option, I think Dread would make an amazing cooler weapon. It's definitely good enough at being aggressive when it has its cooler active, especially given how good Torp is with it, but its paint output on the weapon is absolutely ridiculous, and no longer being hindered by a special that would clash with your roll would be a huge deal for this weapon. Without a high points for special, this thing could easily compete with Pencil's cooler output, if not surpass it, and having Torp as a unique sub-weapon option to support your team at a distance just continues to add to the insane amount of utility on this weapon. I will also note that the main reason I chose this over something like Crab is keeping the main weapon active. I think that Dread is almost impossible to outpaint as a support weapon, can relatively consistently find damage on opponents, and is decently ink efficient, especially given a cheaper sub than Suction Bomb. So I don't really want to have the main weapon being taken away if I'm on the support role for this weapon, which is why I think Cooler is a perfect fit for it. Honestly, I think this would be a game-breaking kit. so I hope they put it in the game. Another one I got to pick out, Explosher. Ink Mine and Crab Tank is a pretty obvious combination here. I think that Explo is a weapon that needs some kind of utility to help keep itself alive. However, Triple Splashdown just leans into way too much aggression. And while it is very fun, I think it clashes with the role too much at the end of the day without being as consistent. Crab Tank would allow you to stay alive, keep a lot of Explo strengths, while giving even more new utility, as well as being one of the only backlines with a Crab Tank. And Ink Mine on this weapon is honestly just the perfect combination. This isn't a weapon that really wants to have a sub at all times, given that it's ink hungry, so something deployable that can hold zone, combo with the main weapon, and locate people to hit over walls is just perfect. Not to mention that Ink Mine and Crab combined make you exceptionally hard to rush down, and give even more sources of damage that can work off each other. This synergy in this kit is just absolutely ridiculous, and I think it would be a backline that is incredibly good at maintaining any kind of space around corners. Finally for the buckets is Pika's Blob. Not too surprising to see Splash Wall here. It really is the only thing allowing the main weapon to be more aggressive and go in, and it's really easy to see the differences in playstyle with it removed in this game. Inkstorm is a special that I think makes sense for it. It keeps its role consistent with support, provides good paint output, and just needing even a little bit of damage in order to become a 3-shot is also good. This kit would also have some very unique synergy in this game though, since if you took a little bit of damage but managed to get your wall up, you wouldn't have to stop firing since your Inkstorm could allow you to heal, and I think Inkstorm's healing in general would just give the weapon even more aggressive options. So in my opinion, this would be a perfect fit for the weapon that would finally give Blob a little bit more playstyle options that it needs. Next up is the Splatlings, all of which were picked out by Bagel, so let's go through them. First up is Mini Splatling. Pretty obvious that the burst bomb on it was going to say, I don't think I need to explain it too much, but Tacticooler is the brand new special for this weapon. I think it's pretty obvious with Zimmy that Mini's cooler output could more than keep up, and having a ridiculous main weapon with a supportive sub on top of it would absolutely be one of the best cooler options this game could ever have. I don't have a whole lot to say about it, honestly. Nautilus is one of the few perfect kits in this game to get paired with Inkjet. The Nautilus here is very similar to the Nod 49 all the way back in Splatoon 2. Very clearly trying to replicate that playstyle. I think Inkjet compared to Zuka makes a little bit more sense for this weapon, given the added mobility could be a bit more useful, when Trizuka's mobility could be a bit more of a weakness given it's also a problem for Nautilus. Splat Bomb is a little bit faster than Suction, which could help a bit more with the combat utility of the weapon, and for the most part, I think it would function very similar to how it did in Splatoon 2. I'm unsure how well it would keep up against mid-range options or Pencil, however, I do think it would be a stronger option than its current kits. For the heavy Splatling, Bagel ended up going with Sprinkler and Tri-Strike. Personally, I'm a little bit more of a fan of Wall in this weapon, as I think it helps a bit more with its matchups against anchors. However, this would be a very self-sufficient heavy Splatling that could work very well with more dive-oriented comps, as Tri-Strike could help a lot with paint, as well as being a way for that team to get in, since it would be a little bit hard to see approaches through the strikes. Sprinkler would keep up the constant paint output, meaning that Heavy would do a great job turfing the map over for those weapons. So I could see it working out better compared to its current kit, which doesn't really have a special powerful enough to keep up in the current meta. For Hydra Splatling, the pick is Ink Mine and Tacticooler. Pretty similar to the armor kit it had in Splatoon 2, but I think Cooler would be a much better choice for Hydra Splatling. My big issue is because of Hydra's slow speed and charge time, it had a bit of a difficult time actually utilizing its armor to its fullest extent, compared to something like Bubbler, which, while it was shorter in Splatoon 1, you could pop mid-charge without dropping it. However, Tacticooler not only could block for you a little bit, but also last forever. So it's not really a big problem in terms of Hydra not being able to take advantage of it. So I think it could be pretty interesting as long as it keeps up the cooler output for its team. Mine is very good on anchor weapons as one of the strongest deployable subs in the game. I think it would help for holding zone, getting damage for the weapon, or just a little bit more consistency. So I could totally see this kit working. Maybe Sprinkler could have been a little bit better for ensuring the cooler output is good enough, but I'm not sure. If Hydra can keep up normally as a main weapon, then I could see this being a very powerful kit. I think the main weapon is a little bit underrated right now, considering just how good it is at shredding objects, and we'd probably see a little bit more of it if it didn't have to pair with Enzap. Next up is Ballpoint Splatling. To basically no one's surprise, Bagel chose to keep the Splatoon 2 weapon kit. Inkstorm's healing utility would only serve to add to the synergy with such a fast-moving main weapon, and beacons are great for the type of comps Ballpoint likes to play with, especially the more aggressive ones this game tends to have. I think this would easily be the best beacon weapon in the game, and I'm just still very surprised that no Splatling got beacon so far, so I would love to see it. Finally for the Splatlings is the Heavy Edit. This actually has the Neo Splash kit, which was not what I expected when I asked him about this. I think that it does make sense though. Heavy Edit's paint output and uptime is ridiculous, having 5 full charges, which means if you give it a special work and farm the other one fast, it's gonna get a lot of them, and the main candidate to benefit from this is Tri-Strike, especially given the good paint output that Heavy Edit Splatling has. I'm gonna be honest guys, while there might be some speed problems here, this is essentially a much more scary Neo Splash that actually knows how to fight. Ridiculous amount of uptime and paint output, and while I didn't expect it at first, I think this would easily end up being an incredibly powerful option with how this would play out. Next up is the Luna Blaster. Keeping Fizzy Bomb is absolutely no surprise, especially after the rework made it even better as a trail to be able to follow if you're trying to approach. However, Splatter Color Screen is an interesting choice for this weapon. It does have a larger 70 hitbox than other blasters and needs to do at least 60 to combo with it, and it could help it get up close considering it is a short-range weapon for sure. However, I'm not entirely certain if Splatter Color Screen is strong enough to be the perfect combination, as well as I'm unsure if Luna is as strong a main weapon to be worth not having a special that might replace it for a little bit. It's definitely hard to say given how long it's been since Luna has been prominent, so I do see the idea here for sure. For Clash Blaster, I went with Burst Bomb Crab Tank. I'm gonna be honest guys, I don't think a perfect kit is gonna even remotely save this weapon, but this is the best I could come up with. I think that having a sub and special that could both easily combo with the main weapon, as well as having one of the strongest specials that also takes you out of your main weapon for a while, is the best thing you could really get on this weapon. Crab is flexible enough to be useful in a multitude of clash situations, and Burst Bomb is the only way this weapon is going to have a remotely decent kill time, so I feel like this kit is relatively obvious. Next up for the normal blaster, Len went with Fizzy Bomb and Killer Whale. I feel like Fizzy is here for pretty much all the same reasons it would be on Luna, so there's not too much to add in this case, but Killer Whale for a special does make sense. It adds a lot of damage that Blaster can very easily kill off of, as well as helps make up for the range disadvantage, and dealing with both Whale and Fizzy at the same time is especially annoying. So I think this would work out quite well for the weapon. Though I will say, if you have someone who closed the distance against you, you don't really have an option to deal with that at all, as both the sub and special work well at a distance. However, Blaster's mobility and kill time is more than good enough to prevent that from happening in the first place. For range Blaster, Gray ended up going with Burst Bomb Killer Whale. Now, once again, there's not a whole lot to say here for Whale since I just talked about it with Blaster, and this is largely the same thing, though you would be able to combo people from further away. Though Burst Bomb with this is pretty obvious. Range Blaster being able to go for Grim combos, even with both Burst and Range being nerfed since the last time we've seen Grim, would still be probably the best thing you could get for the main weapon, and I think being able to use Burst Bomb to try to apply damage for Killer Whale when the main weapon can't reach is pretty useful. Burst Bomb also gives it a mobility option and something it can do if you'd get too close to the main weapon. So it's obviously a very synergistic kit. So it's the Kensa Rapid of Splatoon 2 back, but with a significantly better special, which is I think the best thing you can do for this weapon. Twerp's unique synergy between the combos you can do with it, as well as being able to throw it to locate enemies, is already incredibly useful for the more flexible of the two Rapids, but I think Crab just adds to that. If you want to be a little bit more passive at times or help with retake, you have a special that can do that while being much more consistent than Inkjet, but it also does allow you to use it to tank with the ball form similar to Splatoon 2 Baller, which means I think its flexibility would be a lot better than Jetpack. For Rapid Blaster Pro, it's Splash Wall Tacticooler, a clear reference to Splash Wall and Ink Armor from Splatoon 2. This is a kit that was actually talked about a little bit in the Editor Kits video, since this was Lewis's pick. And honestly, I think it would work very well as long as it's a lower points for special. Rapid Pro is surprisingly good at getting coolers, and with Wall finally giving you a sub that would actually not only be a powerful sub, but prevent the weapon from being rushed down as easily, I think this would be very good for more aggressive dive-style comps, which would honestly be very fun to see. Pencil really needs that competition. That's also an area where I think the Wall would really excel for it though, since Wall would give it a way to stand and contest Pencil, or at least not get shot out of open sightlines. I think if this weapon is going to be really good for the anchor slot, it's gonna need to be the cooler weapon, and this is a kit that'll allow it to happen. Now for S-Blast, I decided to go with Fizzy Crab. I don't think the Burst Bomb combos are consistent enough in order to make the sub that broken on it. So having a bit of a faster movement option and ability to get more of your special is something I found to be a little bit more important. As for the special, Booyah Bomb is pretty even with Crab and very interchangeable in this case. However, I think it would be a little bit similar to V Machine, and Crab Tank would make a little bit more sense for its flexibility, along with being a slightly stronger special. It does also have a little more synergy, since Crab's AoE mode could easily combo with the main or sub weapon if you are trying to use it in combat. Next up are the brushes, all done by Red Shell. Not too surprising to see this kit for Ink Brush. While I could see the argument for something like Kraken trying to full commit to the Splatoon 2 Ink Brush Nouveau playstyle, being able to set up bubbles so easily with the main weapon's mobility would be a ridiculous combo, and I think Splat Bomb is necessary to give a little bit of flexibility, given that most of the maps in the game don't have an easy way to get behind the opponents if you're on defense, and it would also greatly help with the weapon's special output. It's been a while since we've seen a kit that's already in the base game, but Suction Zipcaster makes sense as one to bring back. I think while you could make the argument for a better combat sub like Splat Bomb or a cheaper one like Auto Bomb, Suction Bomb does work quite well at controlling space and helps with its pain output to be able to get your special, and Octobrush definitely wants to get plenty of Zipcaster with how strong it is right now, as well as being relatively threatening with Brush specifically. While we typically see it a little bit more with Stamper, I do think Brush gets enough out of Zipcaster for it to be considered as one of the best specials the weapon could have. Finally is the Pain Brush, a little bit more of a wild card. Fizzy Bomb replacing curling isn't too surprising here. It really does need a mobility option to move, so it had to be one of the subs that did that, and Fizzy Bomb is a lot more flexible. I could definitely see Inkjet working better for similar reasons to Zipcaster on Octobrush, really having a special that can help you close a range disadvantage or give you something else to do. But Paintbrush probably lacks a little bit more as a main weapon, especially in the speed category, so replacing it with something like a jetpack does make a bit of sense compared to something like Zipcaster that would probably not mesh well with the weapon's speed and ink efficiency problems. This is one of those weapons where it's really hard to say if there could be something better in the specials category because it's one of the rarest weapons in the game to me. I barely ever see someone use this at a high level, but I think the idea here definitely makes sense. Next up with Dapple Dualies. It's kind of funny to see that now that the special's been buffed, this really does work out so well with it that Fuzzy ended up deciding that this would be the perfect kit for the weapon. I can definitely see it for sure. Slider is a quick panic button with a nice combo for Torp and works exceptionally well at shredding HP specials, which are incredibly prominent right now, and Dapple has gotten a good bit of results with this very kit in recent months. I think the main concern with replacing it with any different special is really just losing out on the pacing. Reef Slider really does allow this weapon to play very fast, and I think it is the only slider option to have both a combo out of it and a fast movement option, which is good enough reason to me to show that this kit really did end up working out once all the buffs and a perfect meta for the special were on the table. Kibber went with Dualies, and it's not surprising to see Crab Tank return for it. I think that dive comps Dualie plays with typically do want a special that can anchor and give jumps, and Crab is absolutely perfect at doing that while helping on re-entry. The sub is being replaced with something that Dualie hasn't had before though, which is Torp. And in my opinion, I think Torp is a good fit for it. Not really too much in the way of comboing, but it does force you to shoot something down while you have Dualie rolling at you, so it can add to the fast pacing, and this sub has worked very well on similar fast options like Splatana Wiper and Dapple Dualies, so I see where the idea comes from. For the Dualie Squelchers, Fuzzy went with Splat Bomb and Inkstorm. This makes sense for an Inkstorm option given the insane synergy between Inkstorm's healing effect and Dualie Squelcher's mobility, and Splat Bomb returning isn't too surprising. I would argue a cheaper sub like Auto Bomb or Burst Bomb might be a little bit better for it just because you could use it a little bit more, but Splat Bomb's fast explosion is nice in combat, so maybe when you have something like Last Ditch Effort active, it does make sense to have a bomb like this that would be a little bit better at that job. For Glugadulies, it's Fizzy Bomb Crab Tank returning once again. I do see the synergy between Fizzy Bomb and Glugadulie, though it is a little bit unfortunate that a sub of Bomb Defense breaks both of its combos. Found that out once again when editing the third kits video from the YouTube team, since Logie picked that out for the sub on Gluga as well. In my opinion, I think that Wall Booyah is the best thing Glugadulie can get, but I can see the idea of having a more mobile playstyle option while Crab still gives the necessary bit of stability Booyah Bomb provides. And if the current kit isn't doing too well, then maybe there is something better like this. this. Fuzzy's Tetradually also kept its current kit, similar to Dapple's, but for this one it's a bit more of a tough call. Yeah, Reef Slider works in a lot of the same ways in terms of pacing with the weapon, but I'd argue that Dapple gets a bit more utility out of it with the different comps it plays with, as well as having a more reliable combo out of it. Tetradualies has to try and 2-tap someone afterward, so I think it would have made more sense if the sub was replaced with something that could actually work off the slider, just to make that combo a little bit more consistent. But at the same time, it's kind of hard to drop Auto Bomb, since the ability to locate people is pretty useful if you're trying to go for a quick kill or scout out information, which is something Tetra does a lot. I'm not sure what special would be better without having the same speed problem I talked about earlier though, so it's hard to say which combination could be better, but I think it leans to replacing the sub with something that's cheap but could still work with slider a little bit better, like a Burst Bomb, might be a slightly better pick. Finally for the dualies is the Dowser Dualies, keeping its Burst Bomb Tri-Strike kit. While I can understand the Burst Bomb for sure, I have seen Dowser players talk about how Killer Whale's ability to give you an extra dodge roll is a little bit more useful. I think what might make it even better though is Crab Tank, since you could dodge roll and then activate Crab to cancel the lag and try to get into ball form, while maintaining that backline utility. Having a special weapon that could activate a little bit better in combat and help with the dodge roll a bit, rather than having a potential flaw of limited mobility between the dodge roll and Tri-Strikes, might be a little bit more synergistic. But it's hard to say if it's better considering just how good Tri-Strike is right now, especially for the role Dowser is providing. Next up for Brella, we have Splat Bomb Killer Whale 5.1. Now Whale does make sense for the special, we've seen it a lot on high damage weapons in order to try to work with it, and Brella being able to do a maximum of 84 damage is pretty close. Personally, I think Inkstorm might be a little more useful just because of the shield healing synergy being a very unique combo for this weapon, but Brella does really need more damage more than anything else, and this is a sub and special very specialized in dealing that extra damage, so I think it makes sense to go with this over an option like Rain. To no one's surprise, Shadow is keeping the current Sorella Tent kit. I think you could make an argument for Burst Bomb helping with the damage a bit, but Tent is a very ink-hungry weapon, so a deployable sub does make a bit of sense, and the huge amount of damage from the 45 hit and the location effect does make it a bit easier to line up Trizuka shots afterward, which I think is a little bit more useful to have that sub-special synergy. And as we've gone plenty of time with this kit, it's only seemed more and more ridiculous, so I really don't see any option that could possibly top this one. At least that's what me from like a few months ago thought. However, just a quick note from ProChara editing this down. What about Big Bubbler? Being able to set that up with a 10 shield could allow it to be much more useful in defense than any other weapon, but I suppose you couldn't fight with it as well. It's a cool idea though. For Undercover Brella, I went with the classic Kensa Undercover kit. I'm not really sure if there's any kit you can give Undercover that would really make it picked in the current meta. The main weapon really just is that bad, but I think going with the sub that can help with the damage problems, provide some different support utility, and a special that, most importantly, really can just give you assists for the shield regen, which is the only thing making this weapon a pretty competent fighter, is like the only path you can go in. I can't really think of anything else that would work for this weapon. This is kind of the best thing we can get based off of Splatoon 2 existing. But even then, Cooler does not provide HP like Armor does, so I don't even think it'd be as strong as it was in that game. Next up for Recycle Brella is Fizzy Bomb Inkstorm. I think having a movement sub makes a lot of sense for Recycle, since it does help out with its mobility going for quick kills for the extra damage, and it could also, of course, combo with the damage of the main weapon a bit more consistently, given Recycle again has more damage. I'm not as sure for Inkstorm though. I don't know if the healing effect is going to be as useful compared to something like Bubble. Maybe it's the fact that Bubble would anchor you when you have a very mobile sub to be able to work around that might clash with it a little too much, but personally I think just giving this weapon any form of actual shielding is very useful for taking space, and Recycle Shield does serve as a nice way to try and get in and set up the bubble, so I think that might be a little bit better for it, but I can still see the synergy with Inkstorm. It probably helps a lot as well, considering that Recycle's paint is actually pretty bad, which is something I didn't really notice until recently. I played with a top 500 Recycle Brella in solo queue, and yeah, no, that weapon really does not output turf on the ground, so maybe having a painting special makes a little bit more sense for it. This kit is very clearly covering that weakness. Next up for Tri-Stringer is Splash Wall Inkstorm. And I know a lot of the bow players are going to be surprised to see the Splash Wall on here, but no, I do still agree that this is probably the best sub for it. And I mean, if there's anything I can say about this sub, is that they've put Wall on like practically every type of anchor, and it has always been one of the best subs for it. In Splat 1, it was good on V-Jet. It didn't see as much use, but neither did Jet Squelcher in general, but it was a very strong combo. It had some map niches like on Moray Towers. It's broken on Firefin. It was one of the only ways Heavy Splatling could deal with Chargers. There's plenty of other examples. Even Custom Expo honestly gets decent value out of it once your LDE is procced, and I think that Tri-Stringer is one of the weapons that would, again, get some good value out of it just because it can stand further forward. It's harder to rush it down, and that means it can more consistently set up to help its team with chip damage. Now, Inkstorm for the special does make sense to me. Tri-Stringer's pain has gone buffed a lot to the point where I think it is a notable strength of the weapon, so having a special that can stack on it is good. This weapon also does a lot of damage close to being lethal if it does like 70 from hitting 2 bullets or 90 from hitting all 3 explosions, so having a special that can combo off of that damage to help make the main weapon more consistent makes a lot of sense, and Storm will constantly keep the main weapon active. I think this leads to a Tri-Stringer that is very tricky to rush down and has a very easy time controlling space. For the Reflux 450, Gray ended up also keeping the splash wall on the weapon, which I could see there. I think that something like Burst could be a little bit more reliable for the combos without hampering the weapon's mobility. However, Reflux with wall can just take a lot of unfair 1v1s just by having enough time to get multiple different shots off of it, and most Reflux players outside of Turf War in like top JP tournaments and stuff are picking the wall version. That's the one we've seen get top 4 in area cups, so it does make some sense there. Bubble, I think, would be a very clear upgrade over Slider. I still don't really like Slider for it. I think it at least keeps it being more aggressive at times, which can be kind of useful, but the combo out of it seems really situational, and I don't really like it going in and dying as much when it needs to be support at times, so I think Big Bubbler is a much better fix. Synergizes with the tankiness of Wall, can keep people out of the bubble decently well, and helps a lot for securing stuff like a zone. If you put a bubble in and you have a Reflux turfing it, you're basically guaranteed to get whatever area you're trying to contest. Finally, for Wellstring, Arito is going with Torp and Big Bubbler. I kind of already talked about Bubble. We haven't seen it as much on an anchor, but I do think Wellstring plays pretty aggressively since it wants to go for its 1-taps, and it would be incredibly difficult to move it out of Bubble. Bubble's also just a really good special, so it's hard to argue it wouldn't work on a weapon like this, and Torp for it makes sense to me. It would be a little bit more consistent at comboing with Wellstring when defending yourself, while still providing that consistent location utility against sharking weapons. That's worked very well for the auto bomb and point sensor on its other kits, so keeping a location sub makes a lot of sense for me, but I think the flexibility this sub has will provide it more use cases than the other two. Definitely one of the stronger kits here, I think. Zenith Splatana Wiper is a pretty obvious theme here. Wiper can struggle a little bit when dealing damage if it's not up close, so let's give it 2 tools that help it deal damage. I think Torp might be a little bit better for it personally, though. I think having to shoot Torps while also dealing with a flanking weapon is incredibly broken, but I can see the idea behind Burst Bomb. Obviously, the gap isn't that large in my head. And Killer Whale over Stamp is the big upgrade here. Rather than having a special that'll actively sabotage you a lot of the time and is incredibly difficult to get good value at a high level, having one that just adds to the damage you're doing without taking away from Wiper's mobility at all will make it really tricky to pin down. I could see something like Rain also helping with the extra healing effect it provides with Wiper's good mobility, but Whale will also definitely work for a weapon that so consistently will be dealing 90 damage. So that makes a lot of sense here. Splatana Stamper is going to keep its kit to no one's surprise. I think basically any top stamper is going to choose to keep this kit. It's basically the main weapon for Zipcaster. It sees a ton of use right now, and the synergy between the main sub and special has been talked about a bunch, including in my own Splatana Stamper guide, so I don't have a whole lot to add here. Finally, Omega's Mint Decapitator will actually get the same kit as Zenith's Wiper, which I found kind of funny. This basically just has the same idea. Mint is very good at dealing 80 damage, so hey, let's have combo tools with that. I think Burst Bomb on this weapon is especially ridiculous, since the damage numbers are good enough to work with the 25 hit of Burst, but besides that, it's really just the same logic that works for Wiper, works here, except it's less mobility and a bit more damage. Hard to say that it wouldn't work here. I think burst combos on Mint alone are absolutely ridiculous, and it makes sense if you're going to stack into that with Burst Bomb, you might as well also keep the Killer Whale instead of something like a Bubble to add to the damage strength you're building on, which is what we see with a lot of these Burst Bomb kits. They tend to also have a special that helps with damage. So before we get to the winners, let's talk about some quick stats time. There are 3 sub-weapons that didn't see any use case: Toxic Mist, Point Sensor, and Line Marker. Now, Dart and Mist are not surprising at all. They're very underpowered and have been for a while. I didn't expect to see them. I think that Sensor is one that I did expect a little bit. It did surprise me a bit, but I think it makes sense. If kits were completely custom picked though, and you fought like a roller team, I could see a ton of the weapons selected just swapping their sub to a point sensor, but I think if you're not in that specialized situation, it makes sense that you wouldn't have it on anything. For the specials, once again, no big surprises. It's just some of the weaker specials in the game. Ink, Vacuum, Kraken, Super Chump, Ultra Stamp, Wavebreaker, and the only one of these that is kind of strong right now is Triple Splashdown. That's the only one we didn't see, but even then there is so much competition for the specials that it does make sense we wouldn't see too many of them. Some of these do have really good synergy combos, but the power stat of a lot of these is just so low that it's hard to see them. For the total weapons with the perfect kit, we had 13 of them, which is Junior, Splash, Carbon Deco, Roller, Dynamo, ZF Charger, Machine, Octobrush, Dapple Nuvo, Tetradualies, Custom Dowser, Sorella Tent, and Splatana Stamper were all picked for this. The last time I did Splatoon 2s, it only had 5, and that's a game with third kits compared to this. 13 weapons out of Splatoon 3's total is 20%. That is a shockingly good statistic. But with that being said, here is the stat total for all the subs and specials. To no one's surprise, Burst Bomb ends up winning with 19 total. It does make sense really, Burst Bomb combos are very strong, though I do think they're a little bit overrated in the custom kit department. Besides that, the distribution was not too bad, all things considered. Obviously a little bit favored Splat and Suction Bomb, but there was a decent bit of a lot of other sub-weapons, including some that people would write off, like Sprinkler or Ink Mine, that were on a decent amount of weapons that worked for them. As for the specials, it was a lot more even, with the top cut being Trizuka, Tri-Strike, Tacticooler, Killer Well 5.1, Crab Tank, Ink Storm, and Big Bubbler, all seeing a good amount of specials, all things considered. It kind of surprised me just how well spread out the specials were in general. You definitely see a drop off after that, but even then most specials have a few weapons that wanted on it, all things considered. Personally, while I think custom kits has potential to be better than the current kit system, I think it's not really the solution we should be seeing for the next game, but it was a fun thought experiment to try it once again, and personally I had a lot of fun looking over all the different kits and seeing what people chose. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this ramble, and a special thanks to everyone who submitted kits. Sorry this video is a few months late, but I hope you all enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time.